Lord Mayor, Lady Mayoress, and distinguished guests, to all of you, wherever and whatever community or part of York or beyond you're from, welcome to this evening's commemoration to mark and mourn the massacre of the Jews of York at the site just behind me in 1190. Firstly, some quick housekeeping. The fire exits are located here and here. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if it does sound, then please make your way calmly to the exits. Secondly, can you please ensure your mobile phones are set to silent? I also need to make you aware that this evening's event is being live streamed for those unable to attend in person. So can I also extend a warm welcome to our international guests who are attending via the Hago live stream this evening. As in previous years, this marking of the tragedy in 1190 has been organised by York's Holocaust Memorial Day Steering Group, which is chaired by Dr. Sam Borin. Those of you who have joined us here before will know that for several years we have marked this event as part of our Holocaust Memorial Day programme. Holocaust Memorial Day is now an established act of commemoration when people from all over the world come together to remember the destruction and devastation caused by the Holocaust and by more recent genocides and persecution. This year, York embraced the theme, Ordinary People, through a programme that sought to commemorate the past, explore the continued persecutions of the present, and to encourage positive actions that will make a difference in the future. In a moment, I'll hand over to the Lord Mayor to open the event. We'll then hear from Dr. Mark Douglas, who's the Senior Properties Curator in English Heritage, and he will be talking about commemoration of 1190. We will hear from Avtar Matharu of York Interfaith Group, who will be reflecting on interfaith solidarity and his own faith. Jack Morris of York Holocaust Memorial Steering Day Group will say the Mourn is Kaddish, a hymn of praise to God found in Jewish prayer services. And finally, we will hear from Dr. Sam Borin, Chair of the Holocaust Memorial Day Steering Group. So with that, I will hand over to the Lord Mayor.
Fasten it onto my laptop, if you could. Thank you, Laura. Up to you. Thank you, Laura, for that introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome, both here and around the world, as I understand it. We are gathered here this evening to remember the massacre of Jewish people, which took place in the building behind me on March the 16th in the year 1190. I will not elaborate on that event further in this brief opening address, but rather will leave that to Dr. Mark Douglas of English Heritage, who I will introduce shortly. I will, however, say this. The events which happened here in 1190 are but one example of the persecution and scapegoating faced by the Jewish people down the centuries. That scapegoating culminated in an act so evil and of almost unimaginable scale in the 1940s that it acquired its own description, the Holocaust. It was my sad but honourable privilege to speak at the Holocaust Memorial Day events a few weeks ago at the Minster and at York St John University, where we marked and reflected upon the Holocaust, and I hope you will find it fitting that I speak to include this evening's commemoration as part of that wider memorial. The Holocaust was an act so dark, so desolate, so devoid of God, that it almost defies description. It certainly defies understanding. The premeditated murder of 6 million human beings, 30 times the present size of the population of York. And it happened not in some long ago brutal dark age, but within living memory, a handful of years before I was born. And it took place not in some despot-ruled backwater, but almost on our doorstep in Nazi-occupied Western Europe. Western Europe, the cradle of modern, advanced, science-based, industrialized, high-cultured civilization. It took place in the land of Martin Luther, of Goethe and Schiller, of Beethoven and Schubert. How would those giants have portrayed this heinous act? That is, if they could have stopped weeping long enough to do so. And it was the techniques of that very science and technology which were deployed to such devastating effect in realizing that evil ambition. This was not killing in the blind rage of battle or the red heat of all-out war. This was the systematic, methodical, industrialized, production line extermination of 6 million people. 6 million of our own species, humankind. By far the majority were Jews, but there were other communities as well. And we must also remember the more recent genocides which have taken place in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, and elsewhere. And there will be more if the reports presently coming out of Ukraine and Myanmar are anything to go by. It defies understanding, and it deserves our constant watchfulness, reminding, and reflection. But York, I'm happy to say, is now a city of sanctuary and was designated the first human rights city in 2017. Like the rest of the UK, it has been fulfilling those roles quietly and informally over many, many years. The city has provided a haven from persecution for many refugees, presently those from Ukraine, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. And so, on that note of hope and humanity, I will draw this opening address to a close and introduce Dr. Mark Douglas to tell the story of what happened here at Clifford's Tower on this day 833 years ago. Thank you very much.
Oh, Joe, the microphone. Sorry about this. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Lord Mayor. As a way of apology from my colleague, Jeremy Ashby, who should be here in my place, unfortunately, the rail strike has kept him in London, so unfortunately, can't get him to see you all this evening. He would have really loved to be here, I'm sure. So unfortunately, you've done the short story and got me. So please bear with me. My name is Mark Douglas. I'm the properties curator for English Heritage. I was involved with the recent works at Clifford's Tower. The very important place in my heart. Its history and all the events we've been talking about is something I've been very close to, and me and Jeremy have been working along the lines of the interpretation there, which obviously includes the events we are talking about this evening. So these are from Jeremy's words. I'll start. He's telling the script, so I'll read this out. My subject is the commemoration of the 1190. That is to say, the permanent record in print, in physical memorials and in other materials of the events of March 1190, including the suicide and murder of Jewish men, women and children at Clifford's Tower. This kind of commemoration is a feature of the modern age. Jewish communities have certainly preserved the memory of the York Massacre. In the annual round of prayers, as with other tragedies, antiquarian writers such as Francis Drake of the 18th century clearly knew about the massacre and gave a summary of the best-known sources for it. But in many descriptions of the tower, it received little attention. And for the few visited who entered the tower itself, secured within the walls of the prison as it was in the past, and the county jail, there was nothing from 1190 to see. Only the 20th century changed this. Next year will be the 50th anniversary of the first development of the modern age in terms of the commemoration. And this was the publication by the late Barry Dobson of York University of a famous article entitled "The Jews of Medieval York and the Massacre of March 1190. This text provides an authoritative account of what happened in York Castle during those fearful days, and it's appropriate to start this evening with a summary of what Dobson wrote. He took this primarily from the chronicles of contemporary Christian writers, including two local men, William of Newborough and Roger Howden, but also Hebrew texts, notably a description by Rabbi Ephraim ben Jacob of Bonn. So, the massacre at York Castle famously came as a culmination of anti-Jewish riots in London and in towns along the east side of England. These riots began at the coronation of Richard I in 1189. and took the lives of many Jews in other places, including at least one leading Jewish citizen in York named Benedict. As what happened in York, the riots caused those Jews who were able to seek protective custody within the royal castles. Those officers were charged with the Jews' protection. In some cities, such as Norwich, this seemed to save the communities from wholesale massacre. While in London, the bishop faced down the rioters and apparently saved many lives. In York, in stormy weather and under the cover of a fire in the city, a mob attacked the house of the late Benedict, murdered his widow and children, and setting fire to the house itself. At this point, one of the other leaders of the Jewish community, named Josh, led other Jewish families into the safety of the castle, and as several of the writers described, specifically into a tower, almost certainly a timber building on the mound where Clifford's tower now stands today. But then, as Brian Dobson put it, the critical links of confidence between the Jews and the royal constable finally snapped. Security is ensconced within the keep of the castle, but nervously anticipating treachery on the part of its custodian, the Jews refused to admit him after he went out on business. To readmit him, should say. This development had terrible consequences. The mob of rioters around the castle it was now swelled by professional soldiers under orders from the Sheriff of Yorkshire to recapture the tower, if necessary using stone-throwing siege engines. The sheriff quickly regretted and tried to rescind his orders for the siege, but too late. The mob, whipped up by a ranting priest from one of the religious orders, was out of control and on the point of storming the tower. That night, inside the tower, they took place an exchange among the besieged Jews. The details of this cannot have been known for certain, as yet Christian and Jewish chronicles describe events in very similar terms. A rabbi named Ephraim of Bonn, as Yom Tov of Yonah in France, addressed the whole community and counselled them that since death at the hands of the persecutors was now certain, they should preempt this by taking their own lives. One detail passed over by Barry Dobson has become significant in modern discussions of the massacre. William of Newburgh included in the rabbi's speech a section contrasting the pious death of a believer with the ignoble and sinful life of an apostate. He implies that the attackers had offered some kind of amnesty for anyone willing to convert to Christianity, something that he stated explicitly later on in his narrative. For now, most of the Jewish people accepted Yom Tov's instructions. Newberry gave a harrowing and graphic description of the process by which, having set the tower on fire, the members of the community killed their dependents and finally themselves. Only until a few were left, those who preferred to take their chances with the mob. But in the final horrific turn, the Jews who emerged from the tower under their amnesty had been deceived, and all of them were murdered. Barry Dobson skillfully extracted the sequence of events from the various accounts, working through small details of contradiction in the order in which the events took place or the numbers of Jewish people involved. The number 150, often cited nowadays, is taken from Ephraim of Bonn's account. Some of the Christian writers say that the victims numbered 400 to 500. Barry Dobson's paper, which was sold as a booklet in various places in York, brought the details of the event to a new audience and undoubtedly lay behind the next milestone in the commemoration of the deaths of York's Jews, the 1970 slate plaque at the foot of the mound. Its story has, as far as I know, never been told in detail. The timing of the project was auspicious because 3 people were perfectly placed to make things happen. Barry Dobson was well established at York University. The director of the Ancient Monuments in charge of sites like Clifford's Tower was Vivian Lippman, and a busy civil servant, but also a prolific historian of the English Jewish communities and the president of the Jewish Historical Society was Professor Raphael Lowe. Members of an eminent family of historians, and as a correspondent put it, a serial plaque layer. Unfortunately, we cannot be certain who composed the wording for the plaque, but most likely it was Professor Lowe. The letters were carved and gilded by Dick Reed, a celebrated sculptor and stone carver based in York. The plaque's installation did not go smoothly. The Jewish Historical Society had been prompt in arranging for the chief rabbi and the Archbishop of York to officiate and booking a civic reception in the Guildhall. Less happily, they had not invited anyone from the Department of the Environment or cleared the date, the 8th of October 1978, before it was announced in the press. There was a nervousness that the Prime Minister was about to announce a general election, potentially making it impossible for a minister to attend. And in the background, the Camp David peace talks between Israel and Egypt were causing some to feel anxious about the monument concerned with the Jewish community in the past. They were worried that it might be vandalised. But the Jewish Historical Society diplomatically soothed any ruffled feelings, and the ceremony went ahead successfully with reporting in both local and national newspapers. A more serious problem was that the plaque had been badly sited. In the original, it was originally set flush with the grass at the bottom of the slope, further round towards the west. It would face directly at the zebra crossing. The zebra crossing is now called a pelican crossing, but of course in the hunters it was zebra crossing. The plaque was easily missed, the grass grew around it, and it quickly became scuffed by the shoes of children sliding down the mound. This is not a new phenomenon. A solution was eventually agreed with the City of York Council to relocate the plaque nearer the stairs leading up from the tower, and to reset it above the ground in a new housing designed by the city's engineer. The plaque would move again slightly further away from the stairs to allow more room for groups to assemble around it. And the new setting by architect Hugh Broughton was installed in 2022, along with the refashioning of the tower itself. The third milestone was the planting of the daffodils on the mound. This happened in 1992, and this came a couple of years after March 1990, the 800th anniversary of the Massacre, which was marked by music and poetry and events all around the city for over 3 days. This planting of daffodils was inspired by an Israeli artist, Gera Novak, who conceived the idea as a ring of gold around the mound. In an interview with a local paper, he drew the comparison between the 6-petaled flowers of the species February gold and the yellow Star of David. For him, the flowers evoked solemn memories of the yellow badges forcibly worn by Jews in modern times. Yet the meaning of the daffodils was also have a positive note. I quote, "I hope that these daffodils bloom annually. People will be reminded of the past tragedy, and at the same time, it will be a sign of hope for the future for all those who helped make it possible." Of course, the daffodils in the mound have now attained a much wider meaning than Novak imagined. As an ideal springtime image of the city, daffodils have also been planted on the banks beneath stretches of the city walls, for example. And the original planting of 1992 does seem to have been a remarkable occasion for different groups in the city to come together. Among those planted bulbs, among those planting the bulbs were children from 12 schools in the York and Selby district, Jewish veteran servicemen, and a detachment of soldiers from the barracks at Fulford. The daffodils themselves were supplied by a company in the Netherlands, and it was very satisfying that the same company came back to York in November last year to replant the western side of the mound. This is neither the time or place for a detailed discussion about the 2020 changes to the Clifford Tower itself, except to say that it would be unthinkable for any interpretation scheme not to feature prominently the story of 1190. For everyone involved in telling the story of the castle and the city, the resident Jewish community, City of Council of York, York Museums Trust and English Heritage, there's a unanimous view that this is a story that demands to be told. But to explain it adequately, to answer all the questions that it provokes, to reach everyone who could possibly hear the story, these tasks will always be a work in progress. The replanning of the castle area now being planned offers new opportunities to evoke the memory of the victims of 1190 to a new audience. The days have gone in which Barry Dobson could complain that the 1190 has, I quote, been deliberately remembered as infrequently as possible. This is the task of our generation and future generations to create the next focal point for this precious memory. Thank you. So that's me. And so now we're going to have some music. We will now listen to a recording of Ye Sons of Israel, Mourn. And after the recording, we will hear from Avtar Matharu, Chair of the York Interfaith Group. Thank you so much.
Shalom and good evening. I am a visible minority, a Sikh belonging to a community of approximately 20 million Sikhs worldwide, with approximately 50 or so living in York. I am proud to be different. Through acceptance and understanding, we all should be proud to be different. Unlike the abhorrent massacre of Jews in 1190, no one in modern-day Britain should live in fear of persecution because of their faith, identity, beliefs, and values. Tonight, I am here in my capacity as chair of York Interfaith Group and a person of the Sikh faith. York Interfaith Group brings together people of faith and no faith to engage in dialogue and debate through mutual respect, understanding and tolerance. York Interfaith Group stands shoulder to shoulder in support of the Jewish community in York. We work closely with the York liberal Jewish community and all the good that they strive for. I use the word good because there's no hidden agenda. Working with the York liberal Jewish community, we remember, reflect, and work incredibly hard to dispel those same myths and rumours that led to the atrocities in 1190. We continue to fight against anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance of those who look different, as these injustices are still prevalent in modern-day Britain. Our own work within York Interfaith Group shows that there is still a considerable lack of knowledge within young children of Clifford Tower as a site of massacre of Jews. Last year, York Interfaith Group, in conjunction with York's Standing Advisory Council on Religious Education, otherwise known as Massacre, held a schools competition to design a new logo for York Interfaith Group. The logo had to show different faith symbols and an iconic image of York. We were surprised by the number of entries that had Clifford's Tower as the central image, surrounded by faith symbols, which clearly highlighted a problem that neither teachers nor students understood the historical significance of the tower and its connection to the Jewish community. I'm pleased to say that all such entries were immediately discounted and a message explaining why was sent to those schools accordingly. As a Sikh, my faith reminds me of the power of service to humanity, equality, justice, and helping those in need, but also draws many parallels to the atrocities of 1190. The Sikh faith, founded in 1666, is based on the teachings of 10 gurus. During the period 1666 through to 1708, the history of the Sikh gurus openly mentions the fight against oppression and against conversion to other faiths, even when faced with extreme cruelty. The gurus declined to convert and thus were either publicly beheaded or died in battle. Their children were bricked alive between two walls whilst their mothers watched helplessly. They did not fear death for a righteous world today. 16th March 1190 reminds us of the 70 or so Jewish families that were trapped inside the tower. They had no means of escape and who gave up their lives to maintain their faith, identity, values, and beliefs. Similarly, many Sikhs today remember the 13th of April 1919. The massacre at Jallianwala Bagh, Amritsar, India, where approximately 400 men, women and children of Sikh, Hindu and Muslim faith were killed without warning in an organised shooting by the British Army that lasted approximately 10 minutes, within which 1,650 rounds of ammunition were fired. No medical aid was given. Some people tried to escape by jumping into a nearby well, but never survived. An estimated 1,000 people were present that day in Jallianwala Bagh because the 13th of April is an auspicious day in the Sikh calendar as it marks Vaisakhi. Vaisakhi is both a spring harvest festival and also celebrates the formation of the Khalsa, or the Brotherhood of Sikhism. It was supposed to be a day of celebration, festivities, fun and laughter. A day for families and friends to gather. Let me just put Jallianwala Bagh in context with respect to Clifford's Tower. Jallianwala Bagh is a public garden, approximately 6 to 7 acres. It is completely enclosed by high walls with only a couple of very, very narrow exits. So think of the alleyways in York City. That scenario of Jallianwala Bagh and Clifford's Tower are very, very similar. Okay. Sounds familiar, trapped in a public garden or trapped in a tower and nowhere to go. No escape, just death. Okay. Along with the Lord Mayor, I also acknowledge the Holocaust and the more recent genocides and the undoubted atrocities. As I close, may I reiterate that York Interfaith Group stands in solidarity with the Jewish community in York, and working with the council, communities, businesses, schools, colleges and universities, together we can make York an even better place to work, live and visit. We must continue to strive for York to be a flagship city that is seen as welcoming, safe, caring and humane for all. Toda Rabba, thank you. We will now hear a recording of a Jewish musical setting of Psalm 23. After the recording, Jack Morris will read the Kaddish.
Every year, we pause and try to imagine what happened to York's Jewish community all those centuries ago. Today, we also need to reflect on the turmoil in the Ukraine and the communities that are being destroyed. Kaddish is an Aramaic prayer expressing hope of universal peace and is traditionally recited in memory of the dead. Today we recite Kaddish for past and present atrocities. Now, if it's your custom to stand, then please do so. Yikadal v'kadash shemei rabah, be'almadi v'rei chirutzei, be'amlich malchusei b'chaychon v'meichon v'chayedi kol beit Yisrael, b'gala v'zman keriv v'imeru. Amen. Yehei shemei rabah v'varach li'olam u'lamei almaya. Yisvarach yistabach pa'ah v'rit mamamit matzei, v'tadav v'talel v'talav shemei dikudsha b'richu. Le'elah min kol b'richata b'shirata. Tush b'chata v'nechemata, di'amiram v'yama v'imeru, Amen. Yehei shelama rabba min shemaya, v'chem aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imeru, Amen. Ose shalom bimromav, hu yatse shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imeru, Amen. Please be seated. I'd now like to call the chairman of the steering group, Sam.
My name's Sam. I chair the steering group which oversees this event. I would like to thank our speakers, Dr. Mark Douglas from English Heritage and Professor Avtar Matharu from York Interfaith Group, the Lord Mayor, Jack Morris and Laura Williams. Special thanks go to Liz Roberts, whose work behind the scenes made this event happen. And thank you to the Museums Trust for hosting us so graciously. Finally, thank you all for coming. Before we leave, we will hear a recording of I Will Sing Unto the Lord from Handel's oratorio Israel in Egypt. This oratorio was also the source of the music you heard as we entered. It is based on the story of the Exodus from Egypt found in the book of Exodus. This story is central to Jewish identity and is particularly told at the Jewish festival of Passover. The massacre here took place on the Sabbath before Passover, so the community would have been preparing for the festival.